I get the black claw on that big head of yours, you're going down on your knees begging for mercy.
Lanza coming down to that knee across the chest. And as you say, he steadily softens this man up, steadily weakens him, catches him, and now puts that claw on. And when he comes across both temples like that, tremendous pressure.
Blackjack Lanza. Maybe not a household name like some of the WWF guys, right? But trust me, if you have ever watched wrestling in the late 70s and 80s, then I bet you knew this guy. Lanza was a man who wasn't flipping around, doing fancy moves, or putting on a show. No, none of that. He was an I'm here to fight dude who managed to hypnotize the audience with his I don't give one flying damn attitude. I'm sure the women will get me. A mysterious man who talks less and does more of working. This was Lanza's appeal. Hot, jacked, raw, and totally cowboyish.
I'll tell you one thing. Mulligan and Lanza act as one person. You have the Blackjacks, Lanza, Mulligan, Mulligan, Lanza. We're the biggest tag team in the entire world.
You heard him, right? He's only ever the best in the world, nothing less. But did the wrestling world believe that too? Hold your horses, because this video is all about it and some mind-blowing controversies that really made Lanza the talk of the wrestling town. But before we go into any of that, let's start from the start. Born on October 14th, 1935, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, our boy had a pretty normal start, attending the University of Minnesota and working as a sociology teacher. But something about wrestling called to him. He had to go, he really did. So man traded textbooks for turnbuckles and ran to the first person he could think of, Verne Gagne. Verne Gagne took him in and trained him like a madman, very soon making him step into the ring in 1961 under the name Joe Lanza. Lanza wrestled in NWA Mid-America and quickly proved he had what it took to hang with the best. The rest is history. Now let's come to the part you've clicked on this video for. Lanza was a gritty and hard competitor who made everything look real, sometimes a little too real. That's what people still talk about, and this is his first controversy. If you ever got to see him wrestle against guys like Dominic DeNucci or Victor Rivera, you'd get it right away. Seriously, I found some old footage. Check it out. You can practically hear the smack of his moves.
Covers his ears. The minute he takes his hands down, the crowd starts in again. In the meantime, there is action in the ring between Blackjack Lanza and Ricky Martel. Side headlock into the rope, shoulder. Down goes Lanza. A jump, a flying drop kick as Martel comes to life. And an arm drag takedown. I don't know what happened there, but all of a sudden, Blackjack Lanza able to turn the tables.
Everything he did looked like it hurt, and guess what? It did. Poor Rick. These days, wrestlers talk about guys who were stiff in the ring. Well, Blackjack Lanza? Definitely stiff. He wasn't just for show. His punches, kicks, slams, they landed with real force. He blurred that line between wrestling and a real fight, for sure, and wrestlers hated him for it. But on the flip side, the fans ate it up, especially the hardcore fans back in the 70s and 80s. His matches, whether he was wrestling by himself or teaming with Mulligan against teams like the High Flyers, were believable and exciting because of that realness. Just raw intensity. Now, speaking of intensity, the funny thing is, you don't really hear stories about backstage brawls with Blackjack Lanza. Why? Because people knew better than to mess with him. He just radiated, don't even try it, and people got it. But even after all this, he wasn't a household name. Jack Lanza had been in the business long enough to know that sometimes all it takes is the right moment, the right pairing, to turn a career from steady to legendary. For him, that moment came when Bobby Heenan introduced him to Mulligan. Lanza had built a name for himself as a solid hand in the ring, but something was missing. He wasn't the headliner. He wasn't the guy people whispered about in hushed tones, and he clearly wasn't the next big thing. That changed the day the Blackjacks were born in 1971. Mulligan and Lanza, two men cut from the same cloth, rough around the edges, built for the fight. The first time they stood together, dressed in black, hats pulled low. They knew this was going to be big. Yes, it got really big, but not for Lanza. Mulligan took all the limelight, and our poor boy just became a plain old tag team partner. This also has a lot to do with him switching to AWA and then neglecting WWF altogether. And that brings up an interesting question. Could Lanza have been a bigger star if he had fully embraced the WWF? He had the look, the skills, and the toughness to be a main eventer. But for whatever reason, that never quite happened. Maybe it was because WWF was looking for something different at the time, with more focus on characters and entertainment than on pure wrestling. Either way, Lanza couldn't be a big wrestling name, and I, as a fan, am really sad about that. One reason for this was his partnership with Blackjack Mulligan. Together, they formed the Blackjacks, a tough and successful tag team that won championships and left a lasting impact on wrestling. But being part of such a strong duo had its challenges. People couldn't help but compare them. Mulligan had a big personality, a deep, booming voice, and a look that made him stand out. He naturally grabbed attention. Lanza, on the other hand, was just as tough and skilled, but didn't demand the spotlight in the same way. Because of this, Mulligan became the better-known name. When fans talked about the Blackjacks, Mulligan was usually mentioned first. This happens a lot in wrestling. In many tag teams, one wrestler ends up being the star, while the other stays in the background. Lanza often found himself in that situation. He was quieter and more serious about his work, while Mulligan enjoyed playing a larger-than-life character. Even though Lanza was crucial to the team's success, he didn't always get the same level of credit. Even after retiring from the ring, Lanza still faced the same comparisons. When people looked back on the Blackjacks, Mulligan was often the one who got the most praise. But that wasn't entirely fair. Lanza played just as big a role in their success. Unfortunately, in wrestling, the biggest personalities tend to get the most attention, and Lanza's reserved nature meant he was sometimes overlooked. Sadly, he passed away in 2021 at the fine age of 86. Even though he wasn't a massive WWF star, Lanza stayed involved in wrestling. He took on a backstage role as an agent in WWE, where he helped younger wrestlers improve their matches and made sure everything ran smoothly. This job isn't as glamorous as performing in the ring, but it's just as important. WWE wouldn't have put him in that role if they didn't respect his knowledge and experience. People might argue about Lanza's career choices or whether he should have been a bigger name, but one thing isn't up for debate. He was highly respected in the wrestling world. He was known for his toughness, skill, and dedication, both as a wrestler and behind the scenes. While he may not be as famous as some of the all-time greats, those who truly understand wrestling history know how important he was. In wrestling, respect means everything, and Lanza earned plenty of it. His legacy may not be as loud as some others, but it's just as strong. He was a true professional, a skilled wrestler, and a key figure in the sport. And that's something that will always matter. What also matters is his legacy. And what do you expect from a fan like me? I will not rest until every wrestling fan visits this documentary and feels nostalgic about how great Lanza was. So for the real wrestling fans, here is a quick rundown of his career, from his early days to his peak moments, and finally the end of it all. Growing up in the Midwest, young John was surrounded by a world where hard work and toughness were part of everyday life. Winters were brutal and people were built strong. It was the kind of environment that shaped him into the tough, no-nonsense man he would later become in the wrestling ring. As a kid, Lanza was always active. He loved sports and competition, and like many boys at the time, he admired strong athletes. Football was a big part of his life, and he played throughout his school years. He was naturally athletic, which made him stand out among his peers. But even as he played football, something else was catching his attention: professional wrestling. Back in the 1950s, wrestling was growing in popularity across America. The matches were exciting, the wrestlers were larger-than-life characters, and the crowds loved the drama of it all. Lanza, like many kids, was fascinated by the sport. He enjoyed watching the tough men battle it out in the ring, and deep down, he wanted to be one of them. After finishing high school, Lanza went on to study at the University of Minnesota, where he continued playing football. He was strong, quick, and had the kind of presence that made people take notice. But while college football was exciting, he wasn't completely sold on it as a career. His heart was still set on wrestling. Every wrestler has a moment where their career truly begins, and for Lanza, that moment came when he met Verne Gagne. Gagne was a highly respected wrestler and trainer who had a reputation for turning young athletes into stars. When Lanza expressed his interest in professional wrestling, Gagne saw potential in him. Training under Gagne wasn't easy. He was known for pushing his students hard, making sure they were physically and mentally prepared for the demanding world of wrestling. Lanza spent long hours learning the fundamentals: grappling, holds, takedowns, and ring psychology. He trained alongside other hopeful wrestlers, many of whom would go on to have successful careers themselves. At first, Lanza wrestled under his real name, competing in small regional promotions. The matches were tough, but he quickly gained a reputation for being a strong and aggressive competitor. He had the size, the skill, and most importantly, the attitude that made him stand out in the ring. As John Lanza started wrestling, he realized he needed something to make him stand out. He was strong and skilled, but in the world of wrestling, having a unique character was just as important. That's when he became Blackjack Lanza. He took on a cowboy-like image, wearing black trunks and a black cowboy hat. His new name, Blackjack, made him sound tough and dangerous, which fit his wrestling style perfectly. Inside the ring, he was aggressive and intimidating, always ready to take down his opponents. Fans quickly noticed him. Some cheered, while others booed, but everyone paid attention. His new look and attitude helped him climb the ranks in wrestling, making him a well-known name in the sport. This was the beginning of his journey as a feared and respected wrestler. Blackjack Lanza's career reached new heights when he teamed up with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Heenan was one of the smartest and most cunning managers in wrestling. He knew how to guide wrestlers to success, using his quick thinking and sneaky tactics to give them an advantage. With Heenan by his side, Lanza became even more dangerous. He was already a strong and skilled wrestler, but Heenan helped him become a true star. Lanza and Heenan worked together in the American Wrestling Association, one of the biggest wrestling promotions at the time. Wrestling was very different back then, with different regions having their own top wrestlers and championships. Lanza quickly became one of the most feared wrestlers in the AWA. Fans either loved him or hated him, but everyone paid attention when he was in the ring. He played the role of the villain perfectly, using aggressive moves, bending the rules, and making sure the audience was always reacting to what he did. Lanza's career changed again when he teamed up with another tough wrestler, Blackjack Mulligan. Together, they became known as the Blackjacks. Mulligan and Lanza were a perfect match. Both were big, strong, and intimidating, and they had a cowboy-style look that made them stand out. Dressed in black and sporting thick mustaches, they looked like they had just walked out of a Western movie. They used their size and power to dominate opponents, quickly becoming one of the most feared tag teams in wrestling. The Blackjacks wrestled in different wrestling promotions, but one of their biggest achievements came in 1975 when they won the WWF World Tag Team Championship. The WWF was the most famous wrestling company in the world, and winning the tag team titles meant they were considered the best team in the company at the time. Their matches were exciting and unpredictable. They used a mix of brute force and clever tricks to win, often working together to take down opponents in ways the referee couldn't see. Fans knew that when the Blackjacks were in the ring, chaos was sure to follow. During their time together, the Blackjacks had some incredible rivalries. One of their toughest battles was against the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser, two legendary wrestlers known for their toughness and brawling style. Their matches were intense, with both teams refusing to back down. They also faced the Valiant brothers, Jimmy and Johnny, who were a flashy and skilled team with a completely different style. The matches between these teams were thrilling, as the Blackjacks relied on brute strength while the Valiant brothers used speed and teamwork. Another memorable feud was against Chief Jay Strongbow and Billy White Wolf, two wrestlers who were extremely popular with fans. The Blackjacks, as villains, played their role perfectly, frustrating fans by using every trick they could to stay ahead. Lanza's wrestling style made him stand out. He wasn't just big and powerful, he was smart in the ring. One of his most famous moves was the claw hold, where he grabbed an opponent's head and squeezed with incredible force. It became his signature move, and once he locked it it was almost impossible to escape. His matches were always exciting because he knew how to control the pace, when to show strength, and when to outthink his opponent. He used just the right mix of power, strategy, and intimidation to win. One of the things that made the Blackjacks special was that they weren't just successful in one place. They won championships in multiple wrestling promotions, including AWA, NWA, and WWF. Back in those days, wrestling wasn't dominated by just one company. Instead, it was made up of different territories, each with its own champions and stars. Traveling from one territory to another and still being successful proved that Lanza and Mulligan were truly great wrestlers. Lanza also had success as a singles wrestler. While he was best known as part of the Blackjacks, he also won individual championships, like the NWA Georgia Heavyweight Championship and the NWA American Heavyweight Championship. This showed that he wasn't just good in a tag team, he could also dominate on his own. Throughout the 1970s, Blackjack Lanza was one of the biggest names in professional wrestling. Whether competing alone or alongside Blackjack Mulligan, he was a top star. He won championships, main evented big matches, and built a reputation as one of the toughest wrestlers in the business. Even those who didn't like his villainous ways had to admit that he was one of the best. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Lanza's career was still going strong. He had already accomplished so much, proving himself as one of the most respected and feared wrestlers of his time. He had made a lasting impact in the wrestling world, and his influence was clear in every match he fought. He had played the role of the villain so well that fans never forgot him. His time at the top of the wrestling world had been filled with incredible matches, great rivalries, and championship victories that cemented his legacy. His journey wasn't over yet, but he had already reached the peak of his career. His name was now written in wrestling history, and his success as both a singles and tag team competitor had made him one of the most unforgettable wrestlers of his generation. Lanza's wrestling career had been full of exciting matches, big victories, and tough battles. He had spent years as one of the most feared and respected wrestlers in the business. But as time went on, things started to change. Wrestling was a tough world, and no matter how great a wrestler was, they couldn't stay at the top forever. New wrestlers were coming in, younger and faster, and they were the ones getting the big opportunities. Lanza was still tough, still skilled, but his best years in the ring were behind him. The 1980s were a time of change in wrestling. The sport was growing bigger than ever, and television was playing a huge role in making wrestlers into superstars. Fans started seeing new faces in the ring, and the old legends slowly started stepping away. Lanza knew that his time as an active competitor was coming to an end. He wasn't wrestling as often, and the spotlight wasn't on him anymore. It was hard for any wrestler to step away from the ring, but Lanza accepted that his time had passed. He had accomplished so much, and he had nothing left to prove. Even though he wasn't wrestling full-time anymore, Lanza didn't completely walk away from the business. Wrestling had been his life for so many years, and he still had a deep love for it. Instead of competing, he took on a different role behind the scenes. He worked as an agent and mentor for younger wrestlers, helping them learn the ropes and guiding them in their careers. Lanza had spent years inside the ring, and he knew the business inside and out. He had learned from the best and had been in some of the biggest matches in wrestling history. Now he wanted to share that knowledge with the next generation. Many young wrestlers respected Lanza and listened carefully to his advice. He helped them understand how to tell a story in the ring, how to connect with the audience, and how to handle themselves as professionals. He was tough but fair, always wanting the best for those he worked with. He wasn't interested in being in the spotlight anymore, but he still had a major influence on the sport. But despite everything he had done, Lanza didn't always get the recognition he deserved. Many wrestling legends were celebrated and talked about all the time, but Lanza's name wasn't mentioned as often. He had been one of the toughest and most skilled wrestlers of his time, but he wasn't always given credit for how much he had contributed to the business. Some fans remembered him well, especially those who had watched him in the 1960s and 70s, but newer fans didn't know as much about him. He wasn't always included in lists of the greatest wrestlers, even though he had played a major role in shaping the industry. Years passed, and Lanza continued working quietly behind the scenes. He had given everything to wrestling, and he didn't feel the need to chase fame or recognition. He had always been a no-nonsense, hard-working wrestler, and he carried that same attitude into his later years. He wasn't the type to go on interviews bragging about his past or trying to remind people of his accomplishments. He simply did his job and remained a respected figure among those who truly knew the business. Finally, in 2006, Lanza received an honor that had been a long time coming. The Blackjacks were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. It was a moment of recognition that many fans felt should have happened much earlier. Lanza and his tag team partner, Blackjack Mulligan, were finally given the respect they deserved as one of the greatest tag teams in wrestling history. The ceremony was a special moment, with wrestlers and fans celebrating their legacy. Even though this was an important honor, Lanza still didn't try to step back into the public eye. He continued to live a quiet life, staying connected to wrestling but never seeking attention. He had played his role, left his mark on the industry, and was content knowing that those who truly knew wrestling understood his impact. As Lanza got older, he started to stay out of the wrestling business completely. The sport had changed so much since his time in the ring, and he was happy to watch from a distance. He had spent decades traveling, wrestling in front of thousands of fans, and living the tough life of a professional wrestler. Now he simply wanted peace. On December 8, 2021, Blackjack Lanza passed away at the age of 86. His death was met with sadness from those who had known him and worked with him. Many wrestlers, including some of the biggest names in the business, shared their memories of him. Vince McMahon, the owner of WWE, spoke highly of him, calling him a man's man and recognizing his contributions to the sport. Those who had been lucky enough to work with him knew how much he had given to wrestling. For fans who had watched him wrestle in his prime, the news of his passing was a reminder of just how great he had been. They remembered his fierce style, his intimidating presence, and the way he had entertained them every time he stepped into the ring. Even though he was gone, his matches, his rivalries, and his influence on younger wrestlers would always be part of wrestling history. Blackjack Lanza was a wrestler from a different era, a time when wrestling was tougher and more brutal. He had played the role of the villain perfectly, making fans boo and cheer at the same time. He had won championships, headlined major events, and helped shape the future of the industry. Even though he didn't always get the recognition he deserved, those who truly knew wrestling never forgot him. He was one of the toughest, most skilled wrestlers of his time. He had been a star in his era, a mentor to younger wrestlers, and a respected figure in the industry. His journey from a young wrestler trying to make a name for himself to a legendary figure in wrestling was something special. He had played his part, given everything he had to the sport, and left behind a legacy that would never be forgotten. In the end, all we have to say is, Blackjack Lanza was more than just a wrestler. He was a force of nature inside the ring, a tough competitor who never backed down, and a man who truly lived the hard-hitting wrestling life. He may not have been the biggest name in the business, but his impact was undeniable. He brought grit, realism, and intensity to the sport, earning the respect of fans and wrestlers alike. His partnership with Blackjack Mulligan created one of the most feared tag teams in history, and his work behind the scenes helped shape the next generation of wrestlers. Lanza may not have sought the spotlight, but those who know wrestling history understand his legacy. He was a wrestler's wrestler, tough, skilled, and always ready to fight. His induction into the WWE Hall of Fame was well-deserved, and while he may not have gotten all the credit he deserved during his career, true wrestling fans will always remember the Blackjacks and the intensity Lanza brought to the ring. His passing in 2021 marked the end of an era, but his influence will live on through the stories, the matches, and the legends told about him. Blackjack Lanza was a real one. No frills, no gimmicks, just a man who came to fight and left it all in the ring. Many longtime wrestling fans have shared their memories of watching Blackjack Lanza in action. One fan recalled seeing him live in the late 70s, saying they had never seen a wrestler bring so much aggression and realism into the ring. The way he moved, the way he sold every hit, it felt like a real fight, and the entire audience was hooked. There was something special about the way he carried himself, like he knew exactly how to command the crowd's attention without saying a word. Another fan who met Lanza after a show remembered his firm handshake, the kind that made you feel his strength instantly. He wasn't a man of many words, but you knew he was the real deal just by the way he looked at you. Even younger fans who have only seen his matches through old footage continue to be amazed by his style. One fan wrote about how watching Lanza was like seeing a master at work, someone who knew how to make every move look painful and real. In an era where wrestling has changed so much, it's easy to appreciate what Lanza brought to the sport. His career may have had ups and downs, but the respect he earned was timeless. He never chased fame or tried to remind people of his accomplishments. He simply did his job and remained a respected figure among those who truly knew the business. Finally, in 2006, Lanza received an honor that had been a long time coming. The Blackjacks were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and it was a moment of recognition that many fans felt should have happened much earlier. He and Mulligan were finally given the respect they deserved as one of the greatest tag teams in wrestling history. The ceremony was a special moment, with wrestlers and fans celebrating their legacy. Even though this was an important honor, Lanza still didn't try to step back into the public eye. He continued to live a quiet life, staying connected to wrestling but never seeking attention. He had played his role, left his mark on the industry, and was content knowing that those who truly understood wrestling history recognized his impact. Even though he didn't always get the recognition he deserved, those who truly knew wrestling never forgot him. He was one of the toughest, most skilled wrestlers of his time. He had been a star in his era, a mentor to younger wrestlers, and a respected figure in the industry. His journey from a young wrestler trying to make a name for himself to a legendary figure in wrestling was something special. He had played his part, given everything he had to the sport, and left behind a legacy that would never be forgotten. And that's it for this deep dive into the career of Blackjack Lanza. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more wrestling history content. What do you think? Was Lanza underrated? Should he have been a bigger star? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep loving wrestling, past, present, and future. See you in the next one.